Hello, this is Tchipakkan, and I am the host, and tonight I'm also the guest because Ivo Domingos can't make it, and he will reschedule. So I wanted to do something fun. Oh, somebody's calling. Pause.
I'm going to mute then.
Yeah, this is Tchipakkan, and tonight I am going to be talking about vampires because I think that it's very interesting. I am especially interested in vampire history. So I will not be talking about Dracula or Dark Shadows or what are those, Twilight or any of those. Many things have there's a lot of cool literary stuff about vampires. Interestingly, I will start with the word vampire was made up. V-A-M-N, as in Nancy, P-I-R, was made up by a German officer in 1725 because apparently he didn't want to use the local term Vrykolakas, and nobody knows why, because it was a long time ago and nobody wrote it down. This term was spread in German newspapers, and then it went to France, where they changed the spelling to vampire, V-A-M-P-Y-R-E. And when it spread to England, they put it to I-R-E. So there you go. And that's the word vampire. But there have been vampire, as in evil monsters who suck the life out of people and sometimes the blood, for about as long as we have written accounts. There are wonderful, there's a great deal of variety. I'm going to put a couple of links of my favorite books into the where did I put them? There we go. Claude Lecoteau's Secret History of Vampires is a good one. He's very scholarly. You get a lot of details from Teresa Bain's Encyclopedia of Vampire Mythology, where she will go into all of these spellings and the different variations. And then, because it's something that the modern world cares about, and I have done on previous shows, Raven Caldera wrote a book called The Ethical Psychic Vampire, because yes, people who know about energy work are aware that you can suck the energy out of somebody else. And I think most of us have encountered people who, if you're near them, your energy goes down. And the cool thing about energy vampires is that they can also suck things out like fear. They can suck out pain often. There are different things that a ethical energy vampire or psychic vampire. Psychic vampire differentiate from the term energy vampire, usually indicates somebody with other psychic abilities, which probably includes the training to be able to suck out pain or suck out panic or suck out other things that you don't want there. So that is something that is more in the psychic and other area that we are dealing with. Traditional vampires, it does seem to be a basic monster that changes depending on the locality. Many aspects of it are going to be seen through whatever your local lens is. You don't get a whole lot of floating heads in Europe. In Indonesia and Asia, you do get a lot of floating heads. Interestingly, in Japan, the floating head during the Edo period, they started doing illustrations of the floating head, and those are the, oh, let me see, I've got to check my notes because I am not tracking that. The Rokurukubi or Negabitati, Negakaba. Okay. Anyway, the head detaches, floats around, sucks energy out of people. But you can cut it. The thread that attaches to the body that has been left behind. Apparently, it's simply the person's spirit, which is traveling, and it looks like a head when you spot it. And the Edo period had lots of illustrations of it. And you got all these women with very long, wiggly necks. And so many later stories were, they said, oh, yes, they have stretchy necks that send them out. But that was apparently simply it's like the, when you're doing out-of-body projection and you have the silver cord that attaches you to your body. This was a cord that attaches the vampire to its body when it was traveling out and bringing energy in. Michael Greer's interpretation of the vampires were that it was they survived, they stayed near their body because they thought they were supposed to, and apparently there's an insulating factor of stone which makes a crypt or barrow or other place with a lot of earth insulation around it will protect the psychic energy that keeps the spirit vital, but they have to go out and then collect something. Excuse me, I'm going to.
Yeah, so you're all right.
Speak among yourself for a second while I.
Well, I feel like I've been exposed to energy vampires lately because things keep happening that drain my energy one way or another. So.
Yeah, I feel the same thing. It's like you just don't know why you feel drained. And
Yeah.
I'd say drained is the word to describe it.
Yeah.
And
I
I'm
remember
back.
okay.
What I
Good.
missed?
Oh,
Not
Jen and
much.
no,
I was mentioning energy vampires.
Yeah, and I was agreeing with it. We both feel, and the word drained is appropriate.
Mhm.
So
It is something that we have experienced, and it's certainly nothing like the tradition of the vampires, but it would be possible, presumably, for a confused entity or person who was ghost to discover that they could keep themselves on the plane that they were more familiar with by sucking energy out of people. But that's not what most people are thinking about when they talk about vampires and what we are looking at when we are talking about vampires. Now, personally, one of my favorites has to be the Alp, which is a German vampire who wears a white hat. And if you can steal the white hat, then you have it under your control. And you can, it will become a attentive and loving lover, and it will protect you and give you the wishes, as it were. However, the Alp is generally considered negative because it does suck energy away. Another unique thing about the Alp is that it will spit butterflies and moths, or they will come out of its mouth, and it gives you vivid and sometimes terrifying dreams, leaving the victim drained. In Iceland, they believe that an old person and a child sleeping in the same room, the elder will suck energy out of the child. And then there's another thing that they would do against the Alp is to, same thing they do on 12th night, is in Germany, they put a pentagram on the front door with the names of Elias and Enoch, or a hexagram with the names of the three kings, Caspar, Melchior, and Balthazar, or sometimes just their initials. And they will, another thing you could do, which is a lot less clean than chalking a pentagram or initials on your door frame, is bury a stillborn child under the front door. That will repel any Alps from coming to the people in the thing. If you see a moth coming out of somebody's mouth and suspect that there is an energy vampire around, the Alp around, you would say, Trude, come back and I will give you something. And then the next day when somebody comes, you don't give them something, but you say, oh, come back tomorrow and have a drink with me. And then when they come back the next day, presumably this will be the same woman that you saw with a moth coming out of her mouth. You give her a drink, and then you will be you'll be safe from her, and that's kind of cool. Another way that you can protect them is to take a clean new bottle, hang it in the sun for 3 days so the sun can go with it, and then without speaking, you toss it over your head into a stream. If there is a version of the Alp called an Elb, which also called an Otterman, who is a water vampire. He lives in water, and he tends to he will attack anyone who fouls the water or picks night blooming flowers near his area. And he attacks by giving people nightmares, after which they feel drained. I happen to like Alps. They are so very ambiguous. They show a whole lot of okay, this is a spirit entity that, depending on how you treat them, may be very dangerous or they may be okay. Whereas, say, in what are some other ones? Oh, things that we think we know about vampires. You have to invite them in. Thing comes from the Verdilaks, which is one of the Greek versions. They become a vampire in some fairly standard ways. If they were evil, if they didn't get proper burial rites, if a dog or cat jumped over the body, it wasn't properly protected during the preparation for burial. If it was evil, if it was a magic use, if it had been a werewolf during its lifetime, these things are all things that could lead them to be a vampire. When they wake up, they will wander around town and knock on doors, but they are very impatient, and they will knock on doors. They will also call your name, but they are impatient and they will not knock a second time. If nobody answers the door, they move on to somebody else until somebody finally opens the door, at which point they jump upon them and crush the breath out of their bodies and then suck their blood once they're unconscious. So that's a fairly normal vampire thing, but that's where you get the don't invite them in, because if you invite them in, then that is from the Aegean area. Oddly enough, while they are not patient enough to wait for somebody to answer the door, then knock a second time, they can be, you can protect yourself by them by leaving a knotted bunch of string or yarn on your doorstep, or a sieve, or something to sift your flour with, because they have to stop and untie all of the vampires seem to be very OCD. And they feel obliged if there is a bunch of things to count them,
My
whether
guess
it's the
does that to you.
holes in a sieve, or or you can scatter tiny seeds, poppy seeds, flax seeds, thistle seeds on their grave. They have to count them all. And if you've scattered a lot of tiny seeds, then it may be daylight before they have to go back to bed, and then they have to start it all over when but they feel obliged to count things. And they have, and this is all over Europe, the putting things out that they have to count. They use nets, they use sieves, they use anything that there are a lot of seeds, anything there are a lot of multiples that they have to count. Why they have to count them, we don't know. But that is a fairly standard way to do it. How do you know that you've got a vampire around? Well, usually people start dying, and usually if one person dies and then the rest of the family starts dying, then they come back and they go after their loved ones. So anytime there is a disease or a plague, you see a idea of vampires spreading like crazy. In a lot of times when there's war or a lot of death around, people start wanting to blame vampires, and there you go. There's the big vampire. There have always been vampires. There are always a few vampires around somewhere. There's always a possibility of vampires, but the big vampire scare was after the when you had in the 17th century the big witchcraft scare, and then the people said, no, we can't go around burning witches. You can't get all of your, claim that your in-laws are witches to get them burned. You have to. Then the vampires hit, but and then there was a werewolf scare. So it's like, okay, which I think it was Anne of Austria. No, what was it? I think may have been Anne of Austria, had basically said, no, this is BS, and you will stop. You may put some really strict, harsh laws against digging up digging up graves and desecrating corpses. And when they weren't allowed to dig up graves and desecrate corpses anymore, then they had to come up with something else to panic about. But that was the end of that in that particular place and at that particular time. So that was but that, this is the beginning of the Enlightenment, and they were trying to say, okay, we're going to be really, really scientific. Oh my goodness, did they write some really dumb books in the 18th century about vampires, because they wanted to study them scientifically. It's like, oh my goodness gracious. But there have been vampires, basically people who don't stay dead really bother people. If you have the I see somebody has pointed out, like the Jiāngshī, some vampires are associated with witches, some vampires are associated with demons, some vampires are associated with fairies. Sometimes there's many different varieties. The whole thing is they are all bad because they suck life energy out of people until they die. So yeah, nobody wants that. So you had, how do you, so when you have discovered when you think there must be a vampire in the area because people are beginning to die, as happened in the 19th century in New England, there was during the big TB epidemic, people started, when families would start dying, it's like, oh my goodness, it must be vampires. Well, they didn't actually say vampires, but they dug up the dead body of who died first in the family, cut out the heart, put it on, burned it into ash, and then fed everybody else in the family the ashes as a way to protect them from dying from whatever was killing the family. So let's just say that this is consistent with a whole lot of the other stuff that went on with vampirism throughout history. But frequently their heart was basically, you want to keep them from coming out of the grave. So you pinned them down. You distracted them. Distracting is a lot nicer. They're in the Buckinghamshire Vampire in the 12th century. The Bishop of Lincoln was called in when there was a lot of disease and death going on. And they all said, oh, it's a vampire. And so they dug him up, and no, he had not. His body looked too healthy. But he thought that it was more seemly to pronounce a absolution on the dead man than to burn his body. And as I recall, after he left, they did burn his body anyway, because who wants that? You just, when it's your family that's dying, you don't want to take chances. Burning is usually a good way. Other things that they would do is to put something in their mouth. In Germany, putting a lemon in their mouth. That was the thing. If you saw the picture on the announcement for this event, there's a picture of one of several, of a skeleton that they dug up, and it had a brick shoved in its mouth. That was going to stop the vampire from biting anyone. Now, why, if the vampire is going to get up out of its grave and walk around, it couldn't pull a brick out of its mouth? The logic is somewhat missing in that one. Other things, other bishops would try excommunication. But a lemon or a brick or a piece of pottery. In Greece, they're very big. They take a piece of pottery and put a prayer on it. Some places we used bits of plow and other horse harnesses. Of course, there's always lots of atropoaics, which is protective items. Garlic is always is almost universal. That's because most cultures have garlic in their cuisine. And garlic's good for everything. My goodness, even today, they have discovered that some of the recipes that used garlic are able to defeat the corona, not the corona, Staph aureus, which is the most of the hospital antibiotics will not touch anymore. So garlic is antiviral, antibacterial, fungal. It just really great stuff. So what a surprise that people thought that garlic was going to be the thing that would stop just about anything. One of the authors, I think it was Bain, said that one of the things you'll see is almost when you have a universal danger like this, it shows A, what people fear, and B, the remedy is almost always cheap and available. So you can stick them with a stake, or you can use garlic, or you can now different woods are used in different areas. Some areas like ash, some people like thorn, some people like other ones but It's fairly easy. Now, some places they would simply, I'm spacing the word. You know, when you cut the Achilles tendon, that they would make it impossible for them to hamstringing. That's right. I don't know where that word went. And sometimes they would bury them with a sickle across their throat. Sometimes they would decapitate them. Sometimes they decapitate them and put their head between their legs. Many times, more gently, they would put the they would simply nail their clothes down to the bottom of the coffin. There is one story. Oh gosh, I wish I could remember the source. I could tell you. They staked the vampire, and the vampire looked up at them and took the stake out and said, then thanked him for giving him a stick that he could use to beat off the dogs. So I think that one may be literary, because that it isn't consistent with a lot of the other vampire lore that's around. So according to at least one source I have read, there has never been seen a vampire attack first person. Yes, no, I'm not sure. The story of the Vampire of Croglin Grange, which was one of the first ones that I heard, while the young girl who, this took place in the big vampire craze of the late 18th century. Two brothers and a sister, she woke up, saw something picking at her windows, picking the lead out of the windows. So the glass came out, reached in, opened the window, came in. She felt paralyzed until she felt that bite her, at which point she screamed, and her brothers came, pounded on the door, broke it in, got a few shots out of it, fled out the window again, bandaged up her neck, followed the blood trail down when there was light the next morning, found a crypt that had broken coffins in, and one coffin with a dead body, and it looked too healthy. So they staked it, brought it out, burned it, and then took their sister off to Switzerland to recover. Okay. and why not? But that one is as close as we've got to a yes, we've seen somebody biting someone. Most of them seem to like to sit on and mantle, as they say, crush the breath out of somebody and then drain their blood. So if we look at the across the world, whether it's in Indonesia or China or Japan or Europe, you see a whole lot of people are getting drained of their energy, and they get pale, and that means that people assume that they must be losing blood. Okay, that kind of makes sense. Frequently, the people that are being attacked are children and women, especially pregnant women, women who are nursing. And that, as opposed to old people are not attacked as often. There are wonderful stories about, okay, in Chinese, there's something called the hopping vampires, which they glow green and they travel by hopping. This has been interpreted as these vampires stories come from a period when many of the people in China were traveling a long way to they were migrant agricultural workers. And of course, they wanted to be buried back with their families. so they could get the proper rights so that the family's ancestor line remained good. And so they would be harried in slings back home, which is why they think they were described as hopping, because people had seen porters carrying dead bodies in in slings to get them back home. But I saw one movie once that did have hopping Chinese vampires, and that was pretty weird. Thank you for doing your research. What else? Depending on your culture, see, the Al Ghul was the Arabic blood-sucking jinn. It starts out, okay, he's a jinn. He's an otherworldly creature who sucks blood. The Draugr in Iceland, they had the ability. They were dead. They were revenants. They would show up and they caused trouble. They could control the weather. They could go through stone and go through soil, as revenants do. They would in the story of Glam and Grettir, in Grettir's saga, I think it was, the Glam fought him, and Grettir fought Glam, who had come back and was killing animals and terrifying everybody. And the Draugr would sometimes get on top of the roof and jump up and down and to break the roof beam. Talk about causing trouble. But after he stabbed him and broke the spear off in him, they then dug up the body, and there was the spear point in the body in the grave. So the whole idea of we turn into a mist and then go back into the ground, but takes the physical object with him. That's pretty spooky. Now, when the Draugr could see the future, so you could, they would predict horrible things for the people they were bothering. They could shapeshift. They usually had pale skin, or either the black or blue skin that they describe dead people as having. They were often people who were greedy. There was a specific, oh gosh, which was it? Not finding the reference. In South America, they have, you can tell that they're a vampire when you see them if they look heavier than they were, if they're fatter than they were in life. You know they died, they were buried, but they're fatter and they used to be rich. And so basically, once again, this is, what does your culture fear? And they fear capitalists. They fear businessmen. So therefore, a dead businessman who you see alive when he's supposed to be dead, he's a vampire. And
there is a certain logic to that.
Yeah. And I just kind of, you just look at what scares that culture. And yeah, the answer is usually, if you can find somebody whose body should not be alive, then you burn it up and you get rid of it, because that's not something you want to have around. But
does that mean the next iteration is going to be undead drag queens?
Okay. Let's see.
Well, that's what the masses are being taught to fear right now.
Oh yeah, but they've got to be aliens. A lot of them. You saw that in Dracula. There's a whole lot of fathers afraid that their daughters are being seduced. So there's that sexual component. There is the foreigners. They're almost always foreigners. So a lot of the South American vampires they look like Americans, North Americans.
Once again, logical jump.
Yes, but
Just about any indigenous people then should share some component of that,
yeah,
because virtually all of them have been abused either by the British or by the Americans or
The French or the continental Spanish or
yeah. Now you have another one who appears. This one's appears as a shadow. The Verdilaks, it's Bulgarian, appears 14 days after a murder from the blood that was spilled on the ground by a person who was murdered, and it must be slain by a Sabotnik, which is a vampire hunter. A person who has been given the gift of being able to see vampires. And you see, this is a shadow. Can only be seen by the Sabotnik by using the same type of weapon that created the murder. So if he was murdered by the knife, he has to use a knife. If he was murdered with a gun, he has to use a gun, that type of thing. The Roman Strige or Strix or Striges. Pardon?
Strigo is the way I've heard it lately.
Yeah, well, there's several.
There
are so many versions. Everyone has different pronunciations and spellings. They appeared as birds, usually owls or crows. They are sometimes as old women. They did seem to be associated with Hecate, and they could be put out offerings of honey cakes, chicken hearts, black puppies or lambs, and those would keep them away. The Strigoi were created when a magician or a sorcerer died. They could shapeshift. They sucked energy out. But if you'd remove the heart, spit on it, nail it to his forehead with an iron nail. If it was a woman, you would nail it into her eye, put garlic in the mouth, and then burn them. Oh, yes. And if it was on St. Ignatius Day, the October 17th, then you had to put a layer of lard over it. Don't ask me. I'm just reporting. And that Ovid wrote about them, and Charlemagne passed laws against them. So speaking of the Hecate, the Empusas, which are the oldest surviving vampire myth, were the red-headed daughters of Hecate. And they had mule-like legs with bronze shoes. They could shapeshift, and they could use persuasion or sexuality to get to seduce young men and suck all of their energy out through sex. However, if you could identify them, say, you're an Empusa, you could run away, because apparently they were comically slow. And they really, really hated being insulted. And they might run away from you if you used a lot of profanity and told them how ugly they were. It's like, you're an Empusa. It's like, no, don't call me that. But
for God's sake, do something about your shoes.
Yes. I was talking about the Draugr. There was the other side of the Draugr, which were the sea Draugr, the people who drowned, and they would frequently be covered with seaweed and curly hair, and they were black and bloated, and their penis and testicles were huge. And there's a story of a celebration where some kid had to go out and nobody else would dare to get the new jug from the liquor, which was being stored out by the boathousers for some reason. And he saw the sea Draugr, so he ran back into the churchyard, and he called, "Oh, good Christmas, Christian souls, protect me!" And all of the bodies jumped up out of the ground in the graveyard and fought off the sea Draugr. Well, he beat his way back to the to where the party was going on. And in the morning they came out and they found the churchyard totally wrecked with lots of seaweed and broken coffins and all kinds, looked like a battle zone. Which led them to believe that the kid had been actually seen a battle between the sea and the land Draugr. So kind of cool. The ones like there are many varieties. The Rusalka, who were water spirits from Eastern Europe that came out of water. They seem to be, their way of draining you of energy was they'd ask you to dance with them, and you would dance until you fell down dead. And then they might drink your blood. But the Baobhan Sith were Scottish version, usually women who died in childbirth, and they were seen with green dresses and sometimes had hooves, and then they would lure the young men with their sexual stuff, and sometimes they would shapeshift into a crow or a fog, but they were in the Fey type, and so you could repel them with any kind of iron. And they suggested that you carry scissors with you, protect it. So let's see what else. The Vrykolakas were another Greek variety, and they had very tight skin, which is what happens when a corpse starts to bloat. They were created in the usual ways. They had been the victim of murder or some other violent death, or a cat jumped over the corpse, or they were suicides, or they had inadvertently eaten some lamb meat of a sheep that had been killed by a wolf. So, as you can see, you could be perfectly innocent. You could be really evil and come back as a vampire, or you could be an innocent victim and, the victim of a murder and twice victimized by having to come back as a vampire. How annoying. The Kalakandros were another group version, well, from the entire Aegean area, then Crete and Greece in Turkey. If they were born on Christmas or solstice or during Saturnalia, they were that would make them, they were destined to grow up and be a vampire or a Kalakandros. But so they would immediately be bound up with some garlic and then held their poor little newborn baby's feet in the fire until their toes turned black. That would keep them from growing up to be a vampire. It's like, well, shoot.
Probably keep them from growing up, period.
I was going to say, you certainly wouldn't turn out to be a long distance runner.
I can't really imagine some mother doing that to her baby, but maybe her father, the father might do that. But
yeah.
And if they did, they would go around. They were only temporarily vampires for the 16 days from Christmas to New Year's, and they would put out hearth fires. They would urinate in the food. They would saw the roots of the world tree. But they were also very susceptible to sunlight. And any kind of fire. If you tricked it into counting to 3, it could count to 2, but 3 is right out. It would burst into flames. No, it would be, if you could somehow trick it into counting to 3, it would burst into flames. So, and it was repelled by church bells, and you could also keep it away by burning an old shoe in salt in your fireplace to keep it from coming down the chimney at Christmas.
Isn't that better than burning the baby's toes?
Yes. But okay, you're going to burn an old shoe. Nobody's going to come down my chimney. Or you put a jaw of a pig over the door or your mantle. The aswang of the Philippines had wings, and they had a long, hollow thread-like tongue to suck the life out of you. In Bali, the Leyak was a vampiric witch, like the Penanggalan, which was another floating head. It had wings that detached it, but in the Penanggalan had the intestines coming out. And one of the ways you could protect yourself was to put thorns around your windows and door and over your doorway, so that if they flew by and tried to get in, they would get their intestines tangled.
The scary part about that one is you could be one and not know it.
Yes.
You could
Okay.
be walking around perfectly normal during the daytime, and you go to bed and your head separates out and goes flying off to suck out people's blood.
Yeah, thank you. I hadn't gotten to that part. So, and the Leyak also could shapeshift into a tiger, or a bald giant, or a ball of light, or a monkey with gold teeth, or in the modern world, a motorcycle without a rider, or a bird the size of a horse. So, but they can be bought off by leaving gourmet food out on your doorstep. And so that, they don't have to have, your blood. They're perfectly willing to eat some good stuff too. And they have in Bali this ceremony they do that can return the Leyak to harmony with the universe. But this is specific to Bali. So yeah, well, you can see that Bali wants to do it the right way. A lot of these the Southeast Asian, the South Pacific vampires were women who died in childbirth. And if you were worried that they were going to turn into a vampire, you would fill their mouth with glass beads and put eggs under their armpits and needles in their palms. So there you go. Let's keep mom from turning into a vampire. Let's see, we covered the Jiāngshī, the Chinese hopping vampires. A lot of vampires represent, some kind of political xenophobia. If your culture thinks that a group of people is scary, like, for instance, the Romney gypsies, they will be generally considered dangerous. Gypsies. There was a guy who wrote a book on vampires in the 1930s or 40s. T.P. Vrykolakas. Let me see if I can put that in there. If you want to look for the book called The Vampire, let's see if that will copy and paste. Yeah, there he is. And he included this wonderful, it's got to pass it on, the vampire pumpkin. Sometimes also vampire watermelons, but basically the Lasani gypsies were supposed to be afraid of vampire pumpkins. Now, the vampire pumpkin is created if you keep a pumpkin in your home for more than 10 days, or keep it in the house after Christmas, or use it as a siphon. And I'm not quite sure how you would use it as a siphon, but and the pumpkin will become a vampire. It doesn't attack anyone, but it oozes blood. And it makes and it rolls around the floor when people are trying to sleep, making an annoying brr, brr, brr sound. And what you do about the vampire pumpkin is that you boil it in water, then you throw the water away, then you scrub it with a whisk broom, and then you throw the pumpkin away, and then you burn the broom. just so that you won't have a pumpkin rolling around your house, leaving blood around and making annoying noises.
But I presume the pot was made of steel or iron or something, so it was safe.
I don't know, but this is just, I mean, as I said, mostly I have left out the modern versions of vampires because we are once again turning to what are we afraid of?
Yeah.
During when sexuality in foreigners, you saw that in Dracula, and then you get up to, I'm getting into the literary things, but you get up to, say, Dark Shadows, and you get the vampire as an addict, as someone who can't control themselves and is addicted, and they can't help they don't want to be bad, but the need is too great, which of course goes back to some of the sexual BS
Yeah,
too.
then you get Angel and Buffy and like that.
And you see a lot of this stuff. And so it's not just they're a dangerous foreigner, they are like a drug addict. They're somebody who can't control themselves. Let's face it, this is why most people are afraid of crazy people, because we don't know, we can't control them. We don't know what is motivating them. Now the literature, even going back in history to, for instance, the Ingwit Castle vampire, guy named Abhartak, sometimes said to be a dwarf, was a jealous husband who was creeping along a ledge outside the tower in order to spy on his wife, who try and catch her with a lover, but he fell off the top of the tower and died. And then after he was buried, there was the animals and people started dying. There was plague, famine. So some local boys dug him up, and at which point they stuck something into his heart, and the whole body exploded. And so they burned everything that was left. And we're
bloated with gas. Yeah,
we're quite, yes, you get that. That you don't see it often, but once a body starts swelling, and that's essentially the thing. I saw if you look at Ask a Mortician, she's got a one on vampires and how different things. For instance, why do they think that their teeth and nails grew? Because the skin is shrinking and it's pulling back and they look longer. Their hair does not grow after you die. It just looks like it's longer because it's shrunk. Why is there blood on their mouths? Because gases push the disgusting kind of mixed up red fluids up through the open pathway that you have in your throat up to your mouth, and that would then stain around the mouth area. You look rosier because you're bloated. There's a whole lot of Ask a Mortician. Definitely go and look.
Yeah, we've seen a bit of that, and it's great. Tchipakkan, I'd like to take a very small side trip here.
Oh, sure.
You mentioned strigoi.
Yes.
And basically my studies indicate that Strix, singular, and strig or striga, plural, is essentially Roman. Strigoi is Eastern European. And this comes up, now, you're familiar with the Witcher series, I assume, even if you don't watch it. Written by a Polish author. And in one episode, our hero had to hunt a strigoi that was wandering around a castle, causing much harm. Well, it turned out that it was actually the princess who had been turned into a strigoi by a curse. But the thing I found interesting about it is they took him down to a basement where they had several large, shallow boxes filled with sand. And apparently there were dead bodies in here. And I suppose if you've been killed by a strigoi, that's how you stored somebody. or maybe they couldn't afford the special effects of showing all these really exotic, distended, bloated bodies. But the Witcher reached down through the sand. You see him poking around and looking thoughtful. And he pulls his hands out. First of all, he finds out that the dead body he's investigating is another Witcher. But then he shakes his hands off and says, I thought so. Heart and liver gone, nothing else. I only know one creature that's such a picky eater, a strigoi. And that was how he identified it. And I thought that was interesting in the context of the strigoi. But yeah, you figure Poland and surrounds, that was their version of it.
Yeah, the picky eater. Well,
yeah.
They often do have a
special diet.
A special diet. They're the things that they prefer. I suppose once you're dead, you're allowed to. The question is, of course, vampires on almost any monster is what is the cultural utility? What is the, it's a revenge, power, punishment. What is the role of women and children and minorities in your culture? Monster stories are for social control. And certainly the fairly universal, they're forced to count things or they're very disrespectful. They tend to think the comically slow, otherwise sexually attractive females that are seducing our young men. There's a lot of disrespect going there. They're very, very powerful, except that we can always trick them. So it's a different thing. What did I want to say? Oh, right. Yeah, there was a thing. 1823. There was an English law against staking suicides. I got a wonderful quote here. Polish theologian Philip Haas, 1506. We do not dignify with burial the bodies of those who are drowned or murdered. Instead, we drag them to the fields and fence the place with stakes. And it's like, guys, and then you're creating vampires like alcoholics, heretics, robbers, prostitutes, murder victims, arsonists, witches, those who are accused of being werewolves, and quote, deceitful and treacherous barmaids.
Oh,
yeah. Ooh.
yeah.
They're all deviant.
Anyone who is outside the sanctity of the church's action.
Yeah. Although there was a wonderful kind of duel in Turkey between somebody who had converted from Christianity to Islam, and so he couldn't be. He turned into a vampire, but said, well, we can't excommunicate him because he's not Christian anymore.
Oh,
so what can you guys? What can the Islamic religious guys do? And they said, well, we can't do anything about it because his soul is corrupted because he started out as a Christian. So they had to start by doing a ceremony to reconvert him. He said, but he apparently appeared and said, I don't want to be converted. I'm happy with Allah. It's like, but we can't. It just it's a wonderful exploration of how people don't like the other, and therefore they figure that being an other is going to make you into a monster, and upon whom you can project all of your worries about murder and drought and disease and animals and your livestock dying, but you can cure it with salt and garlic. So
right.
That's oh my God. The griffin is turned into a wombat or something.
That's a prairie dog.
A prairie dog. Oh, okay. Anyway,
Yeah, that was posted. That is an actual illustration posted by the United States Park Service in response to a question, who's running this account?
ah,
And this prairie dog with his head set and a pencil clenched in his mouth sitting at a terminal. That was just
Okay.
too precious.
And that is now the close of the show.
okay. Well, let me. I've got one more fun story. This is a way to deal. This is how the Dhampir, the offspring of a vampire and a human, often have more abilities to be able to see and detect vampires. They fill a bottle with blood, and then they have melted wax right there, and they put the bottle out. When the vampire appears, the vampire can't get into the bottle because it's too small, and so they turn into mist and go into the bottle to get the blood, at which point they quickly cork the bottle, seal it with wax, and put an impression of a saint's image on the cork. And then they throw it in the fire, and so that it explodes, and the vampire is now that was mist is now destroyed by the fire. So as you can see, there's a lot of fun stuff about vampires. How much of this is applicable in the modern world is highly dubious. We know that we can use it as a way of looking at our own fears. We can look at it as some of the things that might happen after, if you die and are not quite sure that you want to move on to wherever we die after we move, and therefore you try and get back into a body and animate it, if you have enough energy to do it. Hence, a lot of the people who have turned into vampires were magic users before. Then you're still going to need some energy, and so you obviously steal it from the living. A lot of the funeral customs have to do with making sure that anybody who dies stays dead,
Stays that way.
stays in the grave, doesn't come back. Anybody who shows up other than, to say, hi, I'm goodbye, I love you. Oh, and I left the will under the couch. Is considered dangerous, because if they're staying where they don't belong, that's something we're afraid of. So
Well, certainly the Catholic last rites, they talk about dying the good death. And the good death is defined in one way as being prepared to die in a way that allows you to go straight to heaven. And in another way, prepares you to die in a way where there's no unfinished business and you can't come back.
And you're in the good graces of God.
Right.
yes, well, you can see Feather Stitches taking care of one of those aspects right now. There's nothing like dying with unfinished projects. It's
Oh
like,
God.
and so,
All the fiber artists I know are doomed.
yes, we're doomed. So I guess that's it. We will, I hope, have